Live from a grungy kitchen table located in Annapolis, Maryland's scenic and historic capital, it's the Maryland Crabs Podcast. With each episode, your hosts, Tim Hamilton, John Frenay, and the occasional guest will dive in and pick apart the stuff that really matters most to you. We're too lazy to actually solve any of these problems, but we can definitely stir the pot. From schools, politics, parking in the fire lane, to those horrible people who drive BMWs. And here with this week's episode, live from the kitchen table, Tim Hamilton and John Frenay.
This is John Frenay, the co-host of the Maryland Crabs Podcast, and this episode has been a long time in the making, and I had expected it to release a lot sooner. For that, I do apologize. This episode is many things that most of our past ones have not been. It is a lot longer. It's nearly 2 hours. It's not lighthearted. It's depressing at times and very sad. And it is a problem that is a community problem here in Annapolis. As we all know, the Key School was rocked with allegations of sexual abuse by teachers over a period of decades. The school hired a law firm to investigate, and earlier this year, they released that report. A report that many feel just peels back that first layer of the onion. On May 18th, I sat down with a survivor of that abuse and was joined by another one on the phone. This is their story. The discussion that follows can be graphic at times. Emotions are running high. The only editing that was done was to delete the names or identifying details of specific individuals who may or may not have been named in the school's report. This was done because this is currently an open criminal investigation with the Anne Arundel County Police Department. Please be sure to check out our show notes for this episode for several appropriate links. And now, their stories.
One of the big stories that's been in the news, not so much very recently, but before, was the scandal at Key School, where you had the reported sexual abuse of students that spanned decades. And the Key School did do an investigation, and they released a report back in January of 19. Today on the phone, we have a graduate from the aught decade, which is a word that I typically don't use, but that would be the 2000s. And then we also have a graduate from the 1980s. And both have different recollections of and memories of different types of abuse that were witnessed, seen, and experienced at Key School during their times. And I want to thank you both for joining me this morning. We have one here in the studio, and we have another one on the telephone. And one of the graduates is one of the people that is involved with the website that we have published a couple different times called Tupelo in Cyprus, which is I don't want to say it's a cryptic because it is to a degree, but it really details in very, very fine detail all of the different sexual, physical, emotional abuses that may have gone on in Key School, as well as the potential victims, the potential abusers, and whatnot there. So, and
I tried to minimize information about the survivors because they deserve their lives and their privacy. I said as much as I needed to point a finger at the predators, but it's really a site to list the predators.
And it is, and one of the key things that I want to point out with Tupelo in Cyprus is that the goal of it was to stop it, to stop existing predators that may have been at Key School from moving on to other Key Schools as well. And then you also have a very disturbing section about people that have passed away. Well,
I figured that if you got the scope of the story out there, not just the 10 the school admitted to, but, a larger number, that it would make it more likely that fewer people in our community would continue to die. I just, there are too many people who have died of accident, usually drunk driving, alcoholism, drugs. I have a friend who killed himself, and I want that number not to get any bigger.
Well, one of the things I want to sort of step back and set a little bit of a timeline for the scandal to come out. And back in January of 2018, sort of in the wake of the Larry Nassar debacle up in Michigan in the gymnastics, a hashtag movement started to appear on social media called Key2, hashtag Key2.
I did not do that. I mean, I was aware of it. I had some communications there, but I did not.
Yeah, it was another survivor who spoke out publicly.
God bless her.
And there was a petition that went out. I think it was change.org.
I think it was iPetition, but yeah, okay. And the people started gathering in the comments, and then the first Facebook group appeared, which is an open Facebook group and still there. It's called Key School, We Stand Together. It's sort of become the announcements page for the survivors. And again, bless the people who started it.
And obviously when Key School heard about this, which they would, they finally addressed this. Now, this has been going on allegedly since the 1970s or possibly earlier.
My first date of hearing about it going on is the 67-68 year. But there was alleged predator there in the 60s who left the school and came back. So, but the first known instance that I've heard of was around the 67-68 year, and that was with the guy that it was called euphemistically
Okay.
The art teacher.
And I've heard rumors about earlier teachers as well, even from the early 60s. Rumors.
I know that there was a teacher there who was there later who abused, but I don't know if he abused then. I mean, just, absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but I have the stories. I know. The reason I started the website because I had been asking questions. It was, and I had all this information, and I'd been asking questions for years, and the police had the information. The police have everything on the website. They have had that information from before when the website existed. And over the summer of 2018, I was not hearing a lot from the police. I know that they had talked with other survivors because I'd seen some walk in the door with me, or they were there when I came out. And I just hadn't heard anything. So I hunted down the state's attorney general at a political party, and I said, hey, give me your, this stuff was going down at Key School. Give me your email. Okay. So I got his email, and I emailed him my spreadsheets. And whenever I heard about a new predator, as long as it was someone that, it sounded reasonably true, I'd add it to the spreadsheets and re-email. And the last time that happened was in January. I heard about it, really got confirmation on a new predator, or new to me, was in 2019 of January, not terribly long before the report came out. And that was a predator in the lower school, and he was there for I think 40 years.
Wow.
I don't know if he was abusing the whole time. I only heard, but someone described to me the abuse. I'm telling that with the person asked me to get that information out there. So here it is. There was abuse in lower school, and the guy liked boys. And I remember the person described this guy taking boys off to the bathroom, and I remember, I remember that. I remember those boys, and so I tried to contact someone from my time whom I remember being taken off to the bathroom like that. I was jealous, they got to go off to the bathroom with this teacher. But then I found out that I couldn't talk to him because he had died of a drug overdose about 15 years ago, the person I remember being taken off. And the other person I remember being taken off to the bathroom, or I think was taken off, I don't remember it, but he was of that group, is also died of a drug overdose. So was it because of the abuse? Did abuse occur? I didn't see it. I just knew he was taking him to the bathroom. But I also remember that that there was a to-do about about corporal punishment at the school, and supposedly the teacher was taking the boys off to perform corporal punishment, meaning smacking their little bottoms. And there was some problems about that. Sorry, I went off on a tangent a little too much there. Forgive me.
Well, it was. But, getting back just to the timeline, sort of, this evolved. This came out into the public in January of 18.
Sorry about the tangents. It's hard not to go.
No, I totally.
That's all right.
But Key School responded to this in February of 18, acknowledged it, and they hired a law firm out of Baltimore to do an investigation into this. And there was a little bit of a couple bumps in the way where they hired a retired judge, and then that got bounced and everything else. So they ultimately hired a firm to do an investigation. It took them about 9 months, and they released a report in January of 19, which would have been this year. It was a 41-page report. It was very damning, and it named 8 predators by name. They said that they interviewed 57 witnesses, and they could identify what the report says, at least 16 victims. And one of the victims and some of the witnesses that they spoke said that they believe there is significantly more than 25. And they did include that in the report. And that leads credence to Tupelo and Cypress as far as the numbers. If we've gone from, okay, we know of 16, and people are saying, well, no, there's definitely more than 25. You look at the time frame that this has been happening, the number of students that the report alleges that the perpetrators were involved with the students, and the number of students, it stands to reason that it should be significantly larger than what the report details.
Yeah.
Here's what you do.
The report is not complete.
Here's what I did. I looked at the different predators, and I'm looking at these guys at a long time. And I tried to get what I called a rate, which is like, how often do they abuse over like a 2 or 3 year period? How many kids are they going to rape? Let's be clear. It's rape. Molest, rape. How many are they going to? And then you just sort of extrapolate that over the amount of time that they were there. And for me, a conservative estimate is well over 100. I tend to come up with around 135.
What is the enrollment of Key School at this point? Do you know?
It's about 700. The biggest limiting factor on the number of kids who were abused is that the school wasn't that big in the 70s. It wasn't that big in the 80s. I had a graduating class of, in the teens. There were a couple of graduating classes that were in the teens in the 80s, a number. I think that happened in the 90s, and it started getting bigger.
Yeah, and even my class graduating the early 2000s, we only had 29 people in our graduating class.
See, for my period, that would be huge. I mean, a huge number of people graduating.
Nowadays, they are bigger classes. The next year after us, I think, had about 50.
Anyway.
But it's a very small school.
The reason I came on and decided to I put up the site in the fall of 2018. I started putting it up bit by bit and emailing and sending to people, and there were mixed results of how people responded. But I just felt I knew so much, it was making me sick, and I was sick of trying to contact people and finding out they were dead. And this is particularly with boys, or boys who grew up to be men who grew up to be dead. And so I started putting it down, and it made me feel better. And because I used numbers because I was using people's stories. They hadn't told me the story saying I'm going to go put it up on a clandestine website, so I figured I was going to try to offer some anonymity. That's why I did it. And someone said, oh, they did it to avoid defamation, and I don't know how realistic that is, because if you look at schools, I haven't come across schools suing for defamation when people come forward with the stories of child sex abuse. But it was to give some cover for people. And, I know folks are angry about the site. A lot of people hate it. Some people don't. I intend to keep it up, but it is up for the cover. The numbers are there for the cover. And I'm not a newspaper. I don't have lawyers backing me up. I don't have, a fact-checking department and interns. This is me and a few helpers. So a few people who've, stepped forward. So,
well, I can understand the school. Obviously, the school has an incentive, if you will, to keep this as quiet and as small as possible. I mean, that's what they want to be able to do. Certainly, there is a faction of people that want this to be exposed to the very end and no stone left unturned. which personally I think is probably the right
Well,
aspect to
thank
have.
you. You'd be surprised how much of a minority you are.
But there are also a lot of people that, and this goes to, if you take this Key School scandal out of it, you hear about all the time about, women that are raped in a city or something like that, and how much are underreported and to suppress it and whatnot there. And again, that's not fair to anybody on any wavelength. But I understand that there are those factions, and I imagine there's a number of, if you say over 100 survivors. I haven't.
That's a mathematical estimate. I haven't contacted 100.
Yeah, no. I realize that. But if there are 100 survivors out there, it would not be unreasonable for me to think that 70 or 60 of them are like, I need to put this behind me, and let's just squash this. And again, that's not right, because of the people that are living with this, that it has been affected a little bit more. I mean, I would imagine there's varying degrees of abuse that were suffered through the Key School that would affect people in different ways, and certainly up to the point where you had mentioned, where you feel that people have actually died, whether it had been through an addictive something that had gone on, or whether it was a suicide or something. So I think that's something that we need to look at.
There are a lot of reasons, I think, why people may not have contacted investigators, or even if they did contact investigators, why their statements might not have been included in the report. I mean, some people may just want to be moving on from their abuse. Other people just find it incredibly difficult to talk about. Some people may not want to speak with lawyers, feel uncomfortable speaking with lawyers, and would rather speak with therapists, friends, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And certainly, as my friend mentioned, some people have passed away and so would have been unable to give a statement. Plus, it seems like there are many alumni who were not notified of the investigation and didn't find out about it until after the report went public. Because, as the investigators told me when I spoke to them, they're only able to contact people for whom the school already had current contact information. And the school only has current contact information from people who have voluntarily provided it. And we know that people who are abused as children, when they get older, for various reasons, tend to either cut ties with their abuser, not want contact with the institution that perpetrated the abuse. There are lots and lots of valid reasons why someone either might not have known about the investigation, did know about it but didn't want to contact them, or did contact investigators and their statements were not able to be included.
Or that, like they say, I guess summarize, a lot of people who, when they left, they had a lot of reason just to want to walk the fuck away.
Yeah, and again, I think that if you've had a bad experience anywhere, and whether it comes to the level of what happened at Key School or just a bad experience, I mean, the last thing you want to do is to be able to cut a check for somebody for a donation.
Well, yeah,
right.
Right. Also, you're giving your statement to the school, and one of the people that.
Yeah, the school paid for the investigation.
Yeah, and one of the people who gave their statement, the lawyers basically outed them to their predator as the person who had gone to the police about him, which, the school does not seem to respect privacy. If someone walks into the police station saying, "Oh, by the way, there's a child rapist," right? That should be and I know from going to the police that the police actually do try to work to keep their informants
confidential.
It's especially tricky with a small school
in a small
town. And so, privacy and anonymity have not always been respected by the school or the investigators.
Well, one thing, I have contacted the police a couple different times on different things associated with this case, and they are still claiming that it is a very active investigation. So it's not something that they are just shuffling under the table. I do believe them when they say that.
It makes me, it's sort of one of the reasons I've been very reluctant to talk, but it's been over a year, and the message I wanted to give was that there are still predators at the school. I know of 4 with a 5th who has access. And there were probably dozens and dozens of faculty and administrator people who knew about the abuse who were still at the schools. So the main thing I could say is don't hire from the school. Just don't. You could be Russian roulette. You'll get a bad one. And he comes to your place with a lovely clean slate. Or you get someone who is part of the culture of silence. And, I mean, you can hire groups. You can hire sex abuse groups, sex abuse advocacy groups. How do you change a culture of 50 years? I don't know.
Well, one of the things that absolutely shocked me in the report, and I'll paraphrase this, but it was that a lot of the witnesses had said, well, it was the culture of the time, and essentially, and I my head swims, and from a very liberal standpoint of view, I mean, okay, getting stoned with your teacher might be a culture of the time. Drinking with your teacher might be a culture of the time. But I can't even fathom a time when being raped by or having sex with your teacher was just the culture of the time. And it wasn't then and it isn't now, certainly.
There was a topless cast of a female student that was there and on display in a building where everyone can see. I mean, everyone is frightened. There are pictures of little kids dancing in this building, so I assume they all saw this topless cast of a female student's torso, boobs, on display, and it stopped being
an art project.
An art project by Mr. and the student he was his main student he's sleeping with, and it was on display until the building burned.
So this was this a current student at the time, or
they were a student at the time, and they were a student at the time. They graduated in the mid-'70s, but it was on display after. It was on display during and after. There is, and I can get you the images. There was, actually, I don't know if I should, but I can probably bring in the books. There's an image in the Great Picture Book of 1973 of a teacher making out with a student, a female teacher making out with a male student. How that missed being in the report, I don't know. There's a picture.
This is the yearbook.
This is a yearbook. There was another picture, I believe, from Mr. porn, a couple of pictures from Mr. collection of porn images that he made from the students in yearbooks from that time. You know, there's another picture of a teacher. It looks like he's fondling a student. I think that's from the 1974 yearbook. And these were in yearbooks that went out, and I'll bring you copies. I don't know the legality of making a copy of them.
Right.
I mean, so this is a school publication.
Yes.
And we have known that, through the report and whatnot, that the school has somewhat ignored this. Well, not somewhat, totally ignored the accusations that have been levied against the school for decades.
In the 80s,
they say it was the culture of the time, that things have changed, that we're not like that anymore. But to me, saying it was the culture of the time is just a complete deflection of responsibility. It's not acknowledging the pain that people suffered and the things that the school did. It's just trying to absolve themselves of any accountability now.
That is so true. I'm sorry. I'm like, okay, that's like church and pulpit true. It's anyway.
And can I say something more about just like the culture? Yes, the culture at the school has changed. There are no longer these massive sex parties or students being pimped out by teachers. But part of the reason why I initially got in touch with my friend here when this scandal broke is because I did attend the school more recently, and I did experience some more minor sexual abuse, more minor than what's listed in the report. But I experienced it in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I knew of a lot of other people who did too. So the school's culture may have changed, but they do still have alleged perpetrators on staff. They do still have people there. Two of the teachers who I experienced more minor sexual abuse from still teach for the school. They still work for the school.
How does that happen? I mean, at this point, If I'm the headmaster, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to look at my staff schedule or my staff list and say, okay, I want to know everybody that has been here in the 60s, 70s, and 80s and 90s.
I don't know. I'm sure how bright the current headmaster is. That might be good. I don't want to cast aspersions. And he may actually be a good person. He may actually just... Can you be a good person and still be a patriarchal jackass? Anyway, I've seen an email that he sent someone talking about sex abuse in 2016, and again before the story broke. And the guy can't write.
This email was in 2016, referring to abuse in 2016.
Yeah, the email was in 2016. Right. Also and emailed this person again in 2018 right before the story broke. And his responses aren't terribly sensible, and were a little laughable. But yeah,
I think I just want to highlight for you that means he knew. For listeners, just to make sure they're following, that means that he knew about it in at least 2016.
Yeah, well, he had heard about it. And let's get on to some other people who knew about it. The person who's head of. In charge of advancement, which is what you call the money getter, right?
Right.
The money go-getter. The money go-getter was, at one point, the alumni corraler. I believe he's the person who put up the Lost Alumni page. He, in the several years ago, alumni told him to stop putting up images from old yearbooks because they contained people who contained images of people who were basically being abused at the time and of their predators, which, isn't the sort of thing you want to open up at your Facebook feed and find. It's just gross. And he was like, we just want to show how wonderfully happy people were. I'm like, oh, really? And the person, don't say it.
Yeah.
And the person was like, oh, really? Yeah. And I think he stopped it, but, he was told at the time. It's
to look at for the school to say that they've just found out about this 2016 and they haven't, but I mean, I've heard stories about.
I'm mouthing the word bullshit.
Yeah, you can say bullshit. Yeah. That's fine. But I mean, I've heard the story about, and I believe it was funeral. Who was the one that had the funeral and a memorial service?
It was 2000. It was or whoever you want to call him, the art teacher.
1993.
And the person who's in charge of communications now, she had just started, and there was another person who was administrator who left in 2016, who was administrator then and worked very closely with the previous headmaster and with the current headmaster. The point isn't that Tupelo and Cypress found all these secret stories. I mean, there are a few that are going to be hard to hear, but these stories aren't that hard to find. Part of my oh shit moment, and that I shared with my oh shit web programmer, my web programmer friends, is that my friend who's on the phone got in touch with me and said, I've called around a bunch of people from my time. Did you hear about so-and-so? And I look at my list. Yeah. So-and-so? Yeah. They did such. Oh, and suddenly someone had duplicated my efforts by talking to a bunch of people and found the same stories. And the one about the science teacher who's still there, that's not that hard to find. I mean, I have 4 or 5 sources on it.
And can I just acknowledge something here that some of the folks that I spoke to, I wasn't aware that those stories were all going up on Tupelo and Cypress. Part of the controversy happening with Tupelo and Cypress, and I don't want to get off on a huge tangent on this. I just want to acknowledge for any listeners who are upset with the website and are survivors, and anyone that I may personally have spoken to, that I am sorry, because I didn't realize that stuff was going up on the website without the consent of survivors involved. So there are some survivors who are unhappy with the website because they didn't give consent to tell their stories there, or prefer or feel that certain elements of it are not quite what they reported. Certainly not everyone, but some. So I just want to acknowledge that stuff was put up there without consent. Having said that, I do think the site serves a valuable purpose.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Confidences were violated, and we and the decision maker, who would be me, deserves the opprobrium, and I will accept it. And if folks want to, that bothered me a lot. But the choice I made, and I have two minds. One, I think I deserve the crap. I really do. But I made the choice, and I'd make it again because, folks who are triggered and upset and shivering are still alive. And I don't, I don't want to, I don't want to open my Facebook feed and see another funeral.
And honestly, I mean, with like that website, my personal opinion is that if it were not for your efforts collecting that information and getting that stuff out there, then we wouldn't know about a lot of these abuses today. The scandal may still have broken, but the actual act of knocking on doors and calling people, while it may not have always been respectful of people's boundaries, it did rattle the cages. It did shake things up, and it did make it much more difficult for the school to ignore that this was happening.
Thank you, but I do believe the opprobrium is correct.
Sure.
But
sure, absolutely. Well, I'm just saying I have some compassion.
Well, the school has ignored it, and again, going back into the 93.
They sent out a letter calling basically your
the initial post when we put out for Tupelo Cypress.
Calling it untrue. What was it? It was just misinformation or untrue.
Essentially shaming the site and shaming everything on it.
Which is fine, but I again,
thank you for the publicity.
But at the funeral of when they were told, the board was told, this is probably not a good idea to have this public.
So the board was told before the funeral not to have it.
Because of not the funeral, but the
they were told when they decided to have the funeral.
And then
someone told them, don't do it. It could be this guy caused a lot of problems. And the headmaster at the time, who went on to become head of the board of directors of the it's the Association of Independent Maryland and DC Schools. He went on to head that. Blew it off, and he blew off all the survivors who came forward in the 90s, and no one's really talked about that. And he went on to head the private school, Ames. He went on to head that. No one's really talked about that much.
But at that service, from what I understand, somebody who stood up and they were giving the memories of what a great guy this guy was, and said, "Well, here's my memory. He raped me."
I think it was a little bit louder and contained more profanities. But that's exactly that. I wasn't there.
Yet that was still
I was on
beyond
campus
that.
as a child, and I heard about it as a child on campus.
And
I heard about that student standing up at the memorial.
I want to just talk about how open it was, and I'm going to I made this list of stuff I want to talk about. It kept getting longer and longer and longer, and I'm certain it would probably be unfair to go through it all, but I went in 2014. I went for a bike ride. 2014, the mother of a friend died, and around the time she was dying, he had already died. He had died when we were kids in an accident involving alcohol. And I had, around the time his mom was dying, heard that he had actually been abused, and which would explain a lot, because he kind of wigged out before he died. And she died thinking that anyway, after she died, I tried to set out to find out what really happened. And then I didn't know who really asked. And I went out for a run one day, and I saw a guy, and he looked familiar. And I said, "Are you so-and-so?" It was Dr. So-and-so, Dr. So-and-so. And and it was him. And I ended up in his living room, with a glass of wine. I had known his daughters. I'd babysat with one of his daughters. I'd babysat for the two youngest. And I said I was interested in writing about the abuse at Key. And he told me about the guy And he told me about the guy whose wife still works for the school, ex-wife still works for the school. And I didn't heard about Mr. Ex-wife. That's an odd way to say it. Anyway, I hadn't heard about him. And I said, well, will you help me? And Dr. So-and-so said yes. And then he thought better of it, and he wouldn't. But as I was going through some papers in the state archives, I realized that Dr. So-and-so was the head of the board in 1995. And he knew about this. I'd grown up going in and out of his house. And he'd never saw fit to warn me. I don't know if he warned his daughters. I also was in I overheard a friend arrange for me to overhear a conversation with a former president of the board from the 1970s. And I'll just call her Mrs. 70s president. Anyway, Mrs. 70s president, she got her on the phone. Mrs. 70s president admitted to the abuse by the music teacher, the British guy, and a person who isn't in the report, who is a headmaster, said he didn't abuse at the school, but he abused at his previous school, which was why he was kicked out.
And that seems to be a thing, not just in Key School, but in other schools, that it's, okay, we need to get rid of the problem.
Passing the trash.
Passing the trash.
And we send it on. And something that needs to stop.
And then I went, she's a lawyer, and I went to her place, and I was just like, hey, did this happen? And she admitted to my face that she knew about the music teacher. She said, but he was only a few years older than the student, so it was okay. And I'm like, it's like, no. He graduated. No, he was 10 years older than, at least. Because you can find
even if he weren't.
Yeah, even if he weren't. But, it's not like, someone turned 18 and their girlfriend was 17, or vice versa. And a friend's mother who taught at the school from the 60s, and I literally grew up at their house. She taught there, I think, over 25 years. Over the summer, I emailed with her about the abuse, and she's like, yeah, we knew. And we just thought it was sort of not our business, that the students were, it was peers. The students' choice. Yes, the students were peers, and that they should learn to handle themselves. And she knew, and, and stuff happened to me, and she never warned me, and I lived with them for a while. So anyway, the board members who knew Mrs. President from 1970s, Dr. So-and-so, that teacher she was on the board. A guy who's still on the board, emeritus, let's call him, I don't know, Mr. Board.
Okay.
I'm writing down some names. And was also he was on he was there when the survivors came forward in the 90s and told a couple of them to go to hell, or probably a little more polite than that, but not much. There was a person who I think is vice president, possibly president, involved with the local huge festival, who allegedly was told about the abuse in the mid-2000s, was told about abuse in the mid-2000s that was going on, with one of the people that I found out and that my friend found out about too. I'm writing something.
I have some thoughts about this too when you're ready.
Yeah. And she was told, and she's still there. Who went on from the 70s, who allegedly slept with you, or who may have slept with him. They're adults. Went on to be on the board into the 90s, and she admitted she knew. She admitted in the report. Yeah.
Why do you have any idea? I mean, to me, it's unconscionable when you know something. I get a kid or somebody tattling a story. I mean, we hear a lot of times people will tell a story and it may not be exactly true. But you've heard this time and time again. This has been going on for decades. Why does a quote, responsible adult, whether it be a parent, whether it be a board member, whether it be a faculty member, or an administrator, let that slide?
Well, you're talking to two people who have gone bent over backwards and received dogs abuse for not letting it slide. So possibly we're not the people to ask.
Well, yeah. But I can give my own personal,
please.
What I think about all of it, how that happens is, to me, there's a huge disconnect amongst adults on campus between understanding of abuse and understanding of relationships with students. If you ask pretty much anyone who has worked for the school for more than a few years or attended the school, certainly as a slightly older student for more than a few years, if they'd ever heard about any sort of relationships or sexual contact or inappropriate relations, quote unquote, between teachers and students, then they'll all almost uniformly say, oh yeah, I heard about so-and-so dating so-and-so right after graduation. I heard about such and such. I heard about such and such. However, if you ask the same people, have they ever heard about sexual abuse? Many of them will say no. And they're being serious. They really are not aware of what constitutes abuse. I think the main thing that I noticed and observed and experienced on campus in terms of sexual abuse was in the nature of grooming, which
oh my God, there was so much grooming.
Sexual grooming, which is not always an entirely conscious process on the part of the perpetrator, but nevertheless, it still affects victims in equal measure, whether or not it's conscious, where you go through a series of progressive, incremental, gradually more severe boundary violations with a student, whether that is spending time outside class, things that maybe seem totally innocent in the start, spending time outside class, perhaps progressing to telling some sexual jokes, maybe putting your arm around a student, seeing how they respond.
Kissing them on the cheek.
Kissing them on the cheek, telling them they're special, this sorts of behavior, and just flirtations between teachers and students are the kinds of things that I saw happen all the time. And I remember repeatedly being told the narrative that if a teacher dated a student right after graduation, then that's totally acceptable. They're both consenting adults. There's nothing abusive about that. In fact, even when I spoke to the investigators for the report, they told me they were not including any statements from people who had relationships, quote unquote, immediately after graduation. But what the community is not, what many in the community are not understanding is that when there is a relationship immediately after graduation, that indicates grooming prior to graduation. And grooming does not have to involve touch. Grooming is any kind of sexual contact, even if there's no touching involved.
Yeah, this is not somebody that came back for their fifth year reunion and connected with the teacher over cocktails at a thing, and then a relationship developed.
No, and there were faculty, administrators, board members attending weddings between teachers and recently graduated students. So it's not like these are secret, unknown, nobody knew about it. These are public. Many of these things were common knowledge. Even if not everyone knew, enough people knew that it was common knowledge. And for them to still claim that they have never heard of abuse indicates that they still don't know that that is abusive. You cannot legally or psychologically consent to a relationship, even as an adult, even as an 18-year-old, if you have been groomed prior to that. It removes your ability to properly consent to that relationship. So it's still non-consensual.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
And what was that? There was also something that you noticed. I'd seen it, but I didn't have a word for it. You started calling it leveling about.
Yeah. Yes.
Did you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it was worse in your time than mine.
Oh, that's interesting.
Well, there were more chances for the school for generations to pass.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. leveling is another factor that I see is
it's your term. I
as
think it's a
being
good
part
term.
of all of this. Yeah, where adults at the school see the students as a bit more of peers than they do really as students. And so, like certain grooming behaviors, like spending time together outside class, flirting together, these things are, when I was there anyway, were relatively common enough.
That was common in my time too, but also the blurring of other roles.
The blurring of other roles. So it's the kind of school where you don't have just like teachers and students. You have a lot of alumni who went on to work for the school. You have parents of students hiring other students to babysit for them. You have parents working together in professional capacities outside the school. You have multiple generations of families attending the school, working for the school, serving on the board. It's really quite, in my experience, an insular kind of community where people's support networks are entirely involved with the school.
And
so
it keeps so, and you can, and bringing out the story, then it becomes who knew, who didn't know. It breaks up these networks, or it threatens them.
Right.
And I think folks are really,
people are terrified to speak out. I mean, you're speaking out against your community. You're rocking the boat from everyone in your whole life is involved with the school.
Yeah, I have some numbers on here. Let's see. I think it's 30. Okay. Oh, here it is. And also by going I like numbers. Going by Tupelo and Cypress numbers, there are just over 30 children and stepchildren of abusers who've attended the school. Now, this is a message to the abusers out there. If you abuse a child, the moment you then go on to have a child with someone, that child is a survivor/victim. Just from the moment they're born. They're in a situation where if the story ever comes out, it's going to hurt them. Any woman or man you marry, same thing, or have a relationship with. And so there are, over 30 children out there, ranging in age from, I think, toddler through to in their 50s or 60s, who this is going to be really, really hard for them, just because they exist. Because there are also 8 siblings of abusers who attended, and 6 brothers or sisters-in-laws, including of marriages that ended in divorce, who are out and about in the community. And it's a built-in conflict of interest with self. And expand that. The faculty who knew of the abuse, their children are in a really weird position. Mm-hmm. And if you knew of the abuse in your faculty, I only have 2 suggestions to you. One is you need to sit down with your family and say, look, I knew. And then, I don't know if it helped the investigation, but you need to, shrive your souls and call the Child Protective Services and go and sit down with a police officer and tell them what you knew. What you knew and what you had heard rumored. And rate it by how truthful you think the different statements are.
I think for whatever reason, Key School seems to have a far higher percentage of alumni who are children of teachers or administrators or board members than other schools. I don't know if that's actually true, or if it's
think
just
it is.
kind of my perception of it.
I've communicated with their schools.
It seems to be true.
So.
Yeah, and
true concerning Emma Willard and Exeter, at least.
Yes. So I've started a closed Facebook group only for alumni, family members of alumni, and family members of current students, which I can give the name of at the end of the podcast to make sure people know about it. But a few weeks ago, I did just sort of an informal going through the list and trying to figure out how many of our people had parents who were faculty. And it seemed to me to be somewhere around 10 to 15%. And I spoke to the admin of another group at another school, which that has also had its own child sexual abuse scandal, and the Facebook group started as a result of that scandal. And I asked him a few questions about how have you been able to accommodate different people's needs and different perspectives, because there are very different perspectives. And he seemed sort of surprised by my question. He said, we really only have a couple people who maybe had parents work for the school or they themselves worked for the school. And that was a huge realization moment for me as to how enmeshed the community is and how much pressure and fear and terror people may feel about speaking out, and their own, like, speaking out about the school is in a way speaking out about yourself and your own identity. I spent 13 years attending the school. So much of who I consider who I am is part of the school. And when I hear things about the school that are negative, there's still a little pinch in me because it feels like it's a part of myself. It's really kind of messy around boundaries and enmeshment and leveling and all of that stuff.
That's amazing. I mean, I went to a boarding school in Connecticut, and I do know that there are some of the faculty that were there that lived in the dorms, and they had, they married, they had children, and I remember the kids as toddlers that have now gone on to attend that school. And that's almost just sort of like a legacy type of a thing if a parent sends their kids to it. But I mean, this interweaving of faculty and their children in there, and then that is a parent known to the board and whatnot. And I do know that.
And can you imagine if your parent was abusive to you and your parent worked for the school, how few options you would have for who to talk to, where to go?
Yeah,
and
that's a horror story, it sounds like.
Yeah. Not that everybody whose parents worked for the school was abused. I'm just saying.
Sure.
Well, there's someone that I didn't include on the list who was a board member who was exactly that position, because I had no evidence that he had, abused at the school. Actually, contrary to I don't know if this, I didn't put down all the stories that I heard. I put out all the stories I heard that I felt were probably true. So there may be.
Seemed credible.
Credible. And, and it's hard. You see folks in the grocery store, in church, in meetings who have their kids at the school, and every now and then I'll break down and say, "Look, there's still folks there. You've got a 14-year-old girl. 14-year-old girls are the ones that seem to be 13 and 14, 15 is the age they go for." And it's the most amazing thing. It's like talking to a box of rocks. No, everything's fine. No, there aren't even. And I'm thinking, no, there's still some there. There's stories you can hear. You don't have to ask. No, everything's fine. We're so sorry these things happened to you. And I'm like, a few months ago, I just gave up telling people, just because it's like talking to.
Well, the whole community has been groomed. Honestly, the whole community has been groomed.
That's a really good way to put it.
Done a bunch of reading on sexual grooming, especially in institutions, and what seems to happen is that the groomers will groom the entire community into believing that this behavior is appropriate, it's okay. And people in the community, especially if you love the school and you really believe in its educational philosophies and you really, love the fact that Key School teaches in a slightly different way, not referring to abuse. I'm just saying that their own educational philosophies are different from anyone else and better. And we believe in you. Like, you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah. I mean, nobody wants to, admit or something that they made a bad decision. Right. and I mean, you're going to buy into it. I mean, obviously.
Or to admit that they were duped, or to admit that they found this particular teacher charming. They thought it was fine what he was doing. They saw the students as peers and don't want to believe that they themselves were groomed to believe that the grooming of students is okay.
Yeah,
grooming is a community-wide thing. Many people could consider, well, I don't know. I consider most of the Key School community to be in some way, shape, or form a survivor, simply because of the culture of grooming.
I watched
and the
my mom break down into tears and freak out in anger and rage over this. It's just.
Mm-hmm. And this is recently.
This is fairly. When it came out in the papers, she and I had some heart-to-hearts. But I mean, the way I think of it is, the way I think of it, it wasn't that a few select people were abused. The place was a fucking farm for abuse. Some kids got the good treatment, got the good education to go into college. A few people were basically harvested horribly, raped, molested for years, and there were a bunch of in-betweens. I guess I probably fall into the in-between category. I think this is, the question is something that's bothered me recently, is why keep going? Why keep asking these questions? The community doesn't want to know. Like I said, talk into a box of rocks. I mean, I think it's important to get the information out, but there's only so much talking to crazy you can do before it starts ringing in your ears.
What do you think the reason? I mean, why? Again, sort of going back to why they're allowing this. I mean, you had mentioned to get them into good schools. Is that such a driving factor for?
Well, isn't it? I mean, what if Mr. guy was the head of the college program from when it began until was he the head of it when you were there?
Yes, he was. Yeah, he was my college counselor.
Yeah, and you don't want the guy who's getting your kid into name a good school going to jail for he's a grab and grope guy. And I don't know, his house is where he lives right now is right next door to a church. The church has a in August. It's down the road from another church. There's been about 4 churches in the area. Right near a school. The elementary school teacher who was abused is in the same neighborhood. The kids skateboard in the parking lot across from him. It's a neighborhood full of kids, and this is a grab and grope sexual predator who has, there's a smorgasbord out his back door, and the school let him go.
And who was allowed to be at the school for decades and to counsel students into colleges for decades because he had this kind of icon status on campus. My understanding of why he was there for so long, because there was an investigation in the 90s by the police that looked into him. And my understanding as to why he was there for so long is because the board or the higher ups believed that he contained valuable, cherished knowledge and expertise about getting into colleges that they didn't think the school could get kids into colleges without him, which is an inaccurate belief. Sure. You can get kids into schools without having a sexual predator helping them, or in some cases not helping them. He significantly hurt some kids' chances of getting into the schools that they wanted to, simply because he didn't believe in the students,
or because it was they farmed. Who got put towards good schools was to benefit the system that would give them an unending supply of fresh kids to molest.
And you can keep that predator. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, no, please.
You can keep that, like, you justify the abuse of students and justify the grooming and justify the grabbing and groping by saying that, like, that needs to happen in order for the school to have a good reputation with colleges, believing that teacher or that counselor was the only person who could liaise with college admissions people and give a good impression and, pull strings and get people into certain schools. Like, Key School's reputation, a lot of its reputation is based on where their students go to school. There's a huge array of Ivy Leagues and fancy colleges that people go to.
Yeah, the university.
And the belief was that keeping in there, that is grooming. Sorry, that was where I was going with that point.
The schools started getting kids in the University of Chicago because of the philosophy teacher who was listed in the report. The teacher who wasn't listed in the report but was there for a very long time, who liked boys. Went after the boy that I mentioned who died. He helped kids get into colleges too. He was known for writing very, very good letters of recommendation. I want to go back.
It seems okay. Sorry, can I just finish up my point and then? That it seems okay to allow the abuse to happen because they have some sort of, like, cherished value in terms of getting schools and getting kids into colleges. That is a form of grooming. It's something that perpetrators do. If they hold a particular position of status in their institution, such that they can convince other people that they are the only ones with this value or this knowledge and the school cannot survive without them, that is a pattern of grooming.
And I think that's still going. I think it's still going with a couple of people who are still there. They're too valuable to look into. Something I wanted to ask you is the question is, how do I justify to myself, using my talents to try to talk about a place that doesn't seem to want to know? And I think among the school sex scandals that have come out, it's unusual, but I suspect that actually it's not that unusual. This is a country day school in a southern town. This is the South.
Sure.
It is a school that has a lot of power in the town. That's not uncommon in medium, small southern towns. It's just not. And they may talk about diversity, we're so liberal, but there's a component of racism and classism for why people want to send their kids to this school as opposed to the local high school. They're about the quality of education, et cetera. But there's also a certain amount of racism and classism. Right. That's true throughout the South. And I've got contacts down in Georgia, and in a small town, I just asked them, tell me about such and such private school. Did this kind of thing go on there? Oh, yeah. And I think that this happens with a lot of there's a good chance that this happens with the leveling, because it's something that probably happens with a lot of private schools in the South. Well, so what? Well, that's how the power structure of the towns and the local governments is. They go to these schools, and what do they learn at these schools? That women's bodies, because mostly women who are abused, aren't worth as much as men's. Children's bodies are less important than adult desire. And I think this is most damning. It's normal to have your peers be subjected to the most awful of fates. And that's what that teaches. It's a sort of institutionalized lack of compassion. And compassion and empathy are two different things. Empathy is I feel your pain. Compassion is I'm going to get up and stop the painful situation. And I wonder how much this kind of thing is going on elsewhere and how much it's molding people so that they respond like when you say, there's still people there. Oh, I'm so sorry it happened to you. We're going to be very polite to you and we're going to just, not listen. But I think it creates a kind of groomed not listening and a groomed ability to, with the idea that as long as you follow the rules, it's okay if folks suffer awful fates. Yeah. It also a sort of it teaches people lack of responsibility. And one of the reasons I married you out where you are is you stood up and you said, well, I might be responsible, but I'm accountable. It's not the problem I created, but it's it's a problem I'm going to step forward and solve. And, we inherit these institutions, we inherit these situations, and I'm not responsible for what happened to school. I'm not responsible for racism. I'm not responsible for slavery. But I am. But you
can do something now. Yeah.
I am. And what you hear is, "Oh, we're not responsible. We're not accountable." Well, you can't fight every fight, but you need to fight some of them.
That's a great analogy. As I sit there and think about it, you look at all of the different communities and the different atrocities that were committed against African Americans throughout the years, and I mean, community after community is apologizing.
And there was a lot of racism at the school, by the way.
And making reparations for slavery and whatnot now, and again, same thing. They're not responsible, but they are accountable. And it just seems that this is not something that Key School is doing.
It's not. And I'm wondering how many other schools, by saying, "Oh, we just do a report, we say we're sorry." That's not what you're teaching. You're not teaching accountability.
Do you
it's
guys?
It's not changing the culture.
No, it's not. The culture has not changed.
Okay, well, that was one of the questions that I had. I mean, do you think that the school has come out and they have said that they are going to provide a fund for counseling for survivors?
Yes, a therapy fund.
And they've hired an organization to deal with it and to train the staff, and this is now obviously a very public airing of dirty laundry.
I'm not sure how much they're actually training the staff. I'm a little unclear on the involvement of the nonprofit organization with the school, the level of involvement, and how much exactly they're doing. The organization that they say they have, that the school says they've engaged, is RAIN, which stands for the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, I believe. I think that's the acronym. And we know that they are helping the school to administer the therapy fund for former students. And we know that they're also helping the school with arranging a listening session that's been announced for June 22nd. And the listening session is going to have, I think it's an hour and a half with people from RAIN and alumni meeting together, and then an hour and a half with RAIN alumni and people at the school, administrators, faculty at the school together. But I'm not really clear on, like, is RAIN how involved are they? How much are they getting their fingers in there? Because, like, the culture of the school does need to change. And I think my friend here has a point about how this happens in a lot of places.
I suspect it's really common. It just started coming out here.
Right. But there are ways to change the culture on campus. There's heaps of research about this. There are plenty of academic papers on it. There are people who have done it before. It is possible. It takes a really integrated effort, and it takes a dedication on the part of everyone at the school to be on board with the plan and to want to go ahead and do it. I'm not sure that is the case yet, and I'm not really sure that the involvement of RAIN
here's something I as far as accountability. About 2 years ago, I stopped tracking survivors. I mean, yes, obviously I know who a lot of them are, but I stopped tracking. I just said I'm going to focus on the predators and not keep lists of survivors. It seemed an affront to their dignity. And so predators, I don't think anyone should have any problem hunting them. But what about all the? There was when I was tracking survivors, I had a metric that I kept. And the metric I kept was sort of an informal one. Did they make 30,000? Did they seem to make 30,000 a year by the time they were 30? Because, we, from their background, we're good at estimating how much people are making. Did they make 40,000 a year by the time they were 40? Did they make 50,000 a year by the time they were 50? And the people who seemed to have been abused by just one person, they would miss the 30 by 30 metric, but they would hit the 40 by making at least 40,000 a year by age 40, and then they seemed okay. People who are abused by more than one person make none of those metrics. They aren't making 30,000 by 30. They aren't making 40,000 by 40. They aren't making 50,000 by 50. They don't do well. And therapy fund is a start, but it doesn't make up for the years of bad economic and social choices that have led a lot of people to be in poverty.
No, and it's not clear. Thank you for saying all that. And it's not even clear how much the therapy fund is for. Like, how much are they going to be giving out? And
how much? And were they going to demand and to get the therapy? Do you have to promise to be quiet? Can you not talk to anybody?
What's the agreement that happens there?
Something I had never thought about.
And also, what about the family members of people who died? What about that?
What do they get?
What do they get? And what about all the board members and the people who knew about the abuse who gave money to the school? I have a list here, and I'm just going to go through it euphemistically of the people, and maybe the school will. Definitely knew Madam 70's president, Dr. So-and-so. The teacher won the award, the president from the 90s, the current high member of the board, the from the 70s. There's a sailboat lady member who I'm trying not to talk about too much because she's actually been a big help in trying to get the story out. Almost certainly knew. There was who's married to the president from the 70s. I think he was a president one time. He was certainly on the board. He lost his license for sleeping with his patients. Emeritus, who gave a lot for a building that's on the school. Let's call him because he has a graduated in 75, so he would have seen the naked torso, and he probably knew. A guy who graduated in the mid-'80s is on the board. The wife of the headmaster who allegedly abused another school, she was on the board. She's deceased. Another board member, she was married to a doctor. She was president of the board in the 70s, before Mrs. 70s. There's a woman on the board who's an alumni, and her father was also on the board. Actually, I don't know that he was on the board, but he was at St. John's College. St. John's almost elected a former predator or former Key School teacher who was a predator to the presidency of St. John's College. This is in the late 90s, early 2000s. Some survivors derailed it, and I heard from two of those people who derailed it. One of them was a survivor of the guy they almost elected president. The person who was involved with getting the guy who was almost elected president went on to become a and the guy who almost elected the let's call him child is now on the board. So what do they know? I don't know, but that's some leveling.
That really is. Well, what I'm gathering is that you guys sort of feel that this is the reparation fund, the therapy fund, whatever you want to call it, the training, the association with the RAIN is a start.
I hope it is, but there's still people there who know, who I've heard from, who know about it, who knew about the abuse before all this stuff came out. It was just.
It's a huge milestone. I mean, it's more than the school has ever done before, and it is in large part due to a lot of the efforts of several amazing survivors. I mean, the fact that the school did the report, has a therapy fund, is doing a listening session, all these are things that just never would have happened a few years ago. So I don't want to make it sound like they're bad ideas or that they're the wrong direction. They are absolutely the right direction. There's just a lot more that still needs to be done. There are a lot of questions still out there, a lot of issues, and there are teachers at the school who still groom or abuse students.
We don't know if
the work is not done.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any actual abuse after 2006, but although there's some weird shit that happened
that they did with me.
There's some weird shit that may have happened in 2010 and 2013, but again, those stories are nebulous. I don't know a lot about them, and they aren't in TNC. Also, I heard this is nebulous, but at an alumni gathering, someone stepped up and said that the school was getting rid of someone for alleged abuse, and this was in the fall of 2018. There's no way to follow up on that. I don't know if it's true. It was, but that was one of the reasons I decided to get some people to put up the site.
I have heard. Sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. Some other things to think about. I want to hear what you have to say. Some other things to think about is that under current law, you can. Bless you, John. It's under current law, you can sue an institution if there was gross negligence, if it's within 20 years of the person turning 18. Well, the last abuse the school admitted to was in 98. And that was of an 18-year-old, and in the report. And so they admitted gross negligence. It's just outside of the last gross negligence they admit. So I wonder.
I find that an interesting coincidence.
I mean, maybe it just is, but there were things the school heard about that weren't in the report. And,
sorry, I mean, by coincidence, I meant that sarcastically.
Yeah. What we need is a law. There was a wonderful law that almost passed. It missed by one vote. It was HR 687. We need something like that, only a little beefier. And I think one of the reasons the school is doing what it did is it knows a law like this is coming. And it wants to get as many people to sign settlement papers before the brigades come, before the army is at the gates. But we need a law. We need a law that abolishes statutes of limitations for child rape and child molestation. We need to get rid of the gross negligence thing, because it happens without gross negligence. we need to have the window. That was a wonderful thing about that law. We need a window where people where the statute of limitations passed was a window where you can still go back and sue. So you had 2 or 3 year window. And I think these reports that schools do, I think they need to be regulated by the state. They at least need to be submitted to the police with the notes, all the notes, before, just so that they don't inadvertently or possibly on purpose reveal confidential informant who may have gone to the police.
Well, this is on a civil basis, too.
Yes, this is a civil basis.
And on a criminal basis, I mean, the police are actively investigating, and should their investigation come out with, charges where they I presumably would take it to a grand jury to see whether some of these folks would be indicted reasonably. I might assume that some of the people that were on the list in the Key School report might become indicted at some point, but they could face criminal charges, because we have seen just most recently there was a teacher in St. Mary's County Schools, I believe, that lives in Glen Burnie, taught in Anne Arundel for a while, and he was just recently indicted.
The elementary school teacher
for that, right? So I mean, there is some criminal potential. Criminal
charges are possible. Yeah, civil. Right now, the oldest you can file a civil suit is 38, I believe.
And that's based on graduating at 18 and adding 20 years.
And 20 years, right, exactly. There are a lot of other states who have much stricter laws against this. Maryland is behind the curve in many ways. And we know from scientific research that the average age that a person reports child sexual abuse is 52. The average age that someone reports that they were sexually abused as a child is 52. So having the statute of limitations until 38 does not quite do as much good as it could.
That's interesting that there's an average age of.
There were some nonprofits who did some research surveys. And of course, this is just for people who have actually reported. And they found that the average age that someone was when they finally reported their crime was 52. Mm-hmm. I don't remember the exact study. I'd have to find it.
Yeah, no.
Should have thought of it.
No, that it's just fascinating. I mean, I don't know whether it's a maturity thing where we finally come to 52 sounds to me like somebody might have young children of their own that are in that period where they were abused or something like that. That's a fascinating number for me.
And also, like, people, if you grew up in a culture that involved child sexual abuse, it may take quite some time for you to realize that it was abusive, or that to really recognize and separate yourself from that community enough to be able to see it from an outsider's perspective and understand that what happened to you was actually wrong and could actually have led to, current life challenges and mental health challenges, and just being able to move forward with your life.
Also a certain amount of bravery. I have a question. Are you aware of the investigators being told about people abusing after 1998?
Yes, because I told them about people abusing people after 1998. Yes. Okay. And I know there's at least one other alum who also told them, at least one, reported on the same teachers that I reported on.
Yeah.
At least one of them.
Yeah, there was there were some other things, like there was a senior party that the school sponsored that involved the entire senior class being locked in the basement with a wet bar, a lot of liquor.
What could possibly go wrong?
People were banging on the door, scared women, because there was someone who was trying to get them to drink and all go into a closet with people.
And can I say something about this, just because it really gets under my skin, that the school has made public statements that they notified investigators to tell them immediately if there were any reports about current teachers. And the school says publicly that there were no reports about current teachers. I spoke to investigators about current teachers last summer. At least one other person spoke to investigators about current teachers after I did. It's infuriating. It's like screaming into a hurricane. It's like, when will they finally hear and understand all of this? So that report was actually not all that long. Sorry if you don't.
No, please go. No, I know what you're going to say, but I think you should say
that report was not really all that long. The report was 45 pages. I've looked at some reports at other schools that were hundreds of pages. And what they did was, if they could not corroborate a particular statement, that is, if the investigators didn't feel that they had enough evidence to name a particular teacher in their report as being an alleged abuser, then they would still include the witness's statements. They just removed any and all identifying information about the perpetrator, like what they taught, when they were there.
Right. Teacher B.
Reported.
This is what other schools did.
What other schools did. And they simply reported exactly what the former student said happened to them without any identifying info about the teacher. I noticed that Key School's report did not do that. They only included statements that the investigators could independently, between themselves, corroborate and feel confident about publishing the names of the perpetrators. So really, it's a pretty conservative report. Like it includes a lot, but not anywhere near the depth that other schools have done, or the depth that I think Key School really needs.
Well, again, that probably goes back to the fact that the Key School sought out, found the law firm to do it, paid them, and
other schools have paid law firms, and those law firms have produced more in-depth reports.
They were. It's not unreasonable to think that they were paid to produce what they thought they were going to get.
It's a perfectly reasonable statement.
The answer was, somewhat predetermined. They had to come out and say, "Hey, this is what we've got.
Yeah.
We've got to deal with here." But where does Key School go from here, guys? What do you think they need to do additionally beyond what they've already done?
I think the answer is there needs to be a fund of reparations for survivors. Fire everybody who didn't come forward about the abuse before it became known publicly in 2000, before January 2018. I'm sorry, just let them go. There really isn't, and that's going to be probably a huge number of the faculty, and counsel parents and also board members. Just let them go. Try to figure out what percentage of income came from board members who knew. That's going to be hard. These are not things that are going to happen. I focus on, all right, this is a message. I assume that the predators who are still there and who got away without being named are listening. People know who you are. There are a few that maybe we missed, but people know who you are. The police know. The Attorney fucking General of Maryland knows. Or his office knows. They have the spreadsheet. Spreadsheet has been given to select people. It's going to be given to more select people. We're watching. We Google, don't fucking abuse. Okay? Just stop. What I can, and beyond that, it's, the things I wish the school would do. I wish they'd stop putting up signs advertising the school all around town. One goes up right near where the guy who died from my time who died, where he was killed in a car accident. Put a sign right up near there. They probably don't know, but you can not open. One thing I learned about this was all about triggers and trigger warnings. You can, stop putting up. People can not open Facebook. You can not open the newspaper. That seems fairly trivial, but there also needs to be counseling on parents how to act around survivors, because the thing that's stunned me about parents and people who currently have kids at the school is how they seem fine walking around grocery stores and churches and on the streets and in their business, and realizing that there are survivors, they're going to be encountering survivors, and it doesn't seem to bug them.
And they don't know what to say, and so they often are saying the wrong things. And they can be kind of unhelpful things.
Yeah.
What do you say
when I come across survivors?
Yeah. What would do? I empathize and just say, "My gosh, I'm so sorry what you went through."
First, it depends. When I talk to a survivor, I'm looking for information. But even if it's someone I've already spoken with, I'd say I start out talking. It's a nice day. How's the weather? Light stuff. How's your pet? My pet's fine. And how are you? That's something you have to ask. How are you doing? And how they answer is their own issue. If you want to listen to a survivor, and it's a good thing to do, if you feel like you can, and you think that, and they think they're in a place where they want to talk, you listen. You don't try to mold the story. Don't try to interject. Just listen.
Yeah.
And the one time that you might want to interject is if they start talking repetitively, the same thing over and over again. It's like they're going down a hole. Get them out of that. Don't get them out by getting them in the story. Ask them, back to the weather.
Reflect what they're saying.
Yeah,
like or repeat it back and make sure that they know that they are being heard. If they're repeating themselves over and over, it's probably because they're not sure if you're hearing or understanding them. Repeat it back to them, reflect what you're hearing, validate what you're hearing, and first and foremost, tell them that you believe them.
Yeah, you believe them.
I believe you, and it's taken a lot of courage for you to get to where you are right now, and this was not your fault. You are not alone, and I'm so sorry that you had to go through that.
And if they
not giving advice, not trying to tell them what to do, not trying to tell them how they should think of their situation or what you think about their situation, really. It's just about sitting with them and giving them the space, centering their conversation.
And if they are someone who's come forward and been vocal, and you have a moment to tell them, maybe say, look, you aren't going to know about it, but you've saved lives. There was a bit of abuse that I promised I'd talk about for someone. It happened at the summer, we haven't got to it. It happened at the summer camp. And there was someone put out a blog about it. They've since taken it down.
Right. I didn't know they took it down.
Well, I think there might be little bits of it left, but they've backed away from it.
I spoke with her, and she said that, it was too painful, and she needed to refocus her life on something else.
That makes sense.
But I told her was, look, what you did, you'll probably never know who, but there's going to be someone walking around into old age because of what you did that wouldn't be. But yeah, there was abuse at the summer camp, and I haven't been able to find corroboration as in someone else it happened to, but her stories they match physical locations, people, times and date. There's a lot you can corroborate.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is what about the people if the school lets the abusers the school left them out into the community? They're still, what about people they abused in the community? It's pretty clear that that he was living in not terribly far from where we are now.
Right.
It's I'll put it for you on a map. But there were parties with kids. There were parties with kids from the school. And there must have been. I'm guessing that there were kids in the neighborhood. And lived there for a number of years, and then he went on to work with disadvantaged youth in Dorchester County. So you wonder how many, and how many people who left the school went on to abuse elsewhere.
That's been one of the big things that I want out of all of this. Sorry, I interrupted, but I want to see for the teachers who currently work for the school and have sexually abused children, I want to see them no longer working there and no longer working with children, period.
I want them in jail.
If they want to, I know, I'm just speaking for myself. Like, what would feel good for me is to see them no longer working there, no longer having access to children. In jail would qualify all of those criteria, whatever it takes to make sure that happens. In terms of like what else the school needs to do, I do want to I'm working on it right now and how to present it to them. But there's a research report I want to present to the school that is exactly on this topic, is how does an institution that provides services to children and young people construct their culture or change an existing unhealthy culture into one that is antithetical to child sexual abuse. And this report has tons of recommendations. It's an international study published in 2016. I want to get it to the schools so that they can read that advice.
I had the teacher from the 70s went on to work with disadvantaged urban youth, and no one's really. Trying to think. Do you want some more facts? aside,
there's one other thing that I wanted to get into the podcast, but really only one more thing that I can say for the end. So please go ahead.
Okay. There of the 4 of the abusers on the list were headmasters. Some just physical abuse. It wasn't all sexual. It didn't all happen at the school. 5 of the abusers on the TNC list abused boys. 1 liked elementary school boys. There were 2 women.
And that's something that was never included in the report.
There were
they
2.
Never mentioned
There were 3 women who abused. 2 abused boys. 1 abused a woman that I know of. I don't know if she also abused boys. It was a porn collection. I think that was mentioned. There was also a highly suspected porn collection. 29 of the people who abused sexually are still alive, as far as we can tell. 11 still live in the area. I saw one downtown recently. They have worked at 50 plus other schools before and after. 3 people who were married to abusers still work at the school. One of these abusers was named in the report. 3 alleged survivors of child sex abuse currently work at the school. 2 are well known as survivors. Whether they consider themselves
survivors of sexual abuse
yes.
at the school.
Yes.
At the school. Yeah, yes. We're not talking outside the school, but actually at the school who now work there.
And then there are the 5 at the school. 4 employees. 1 is married to an employee. The guy mentioned school's report lives next door to a church. His apartment is walking distance to 4 other churches, a library, and a school in a neighborhood where kids hang out. He's a grab and grope guy. The person who liked the used elementary school boys in the same area. I put up a lot of things. Here's some things to keep. You want to go into what keeps students safe? It's concrete. Would that be useful? Students should never get in a car with a teacher. Just don't. If that screws up folks' carpool situations, so be it.
It's grooming behavior.
Students should never enter faculty and employee houses. Just don't. Exception.
Also grooming behavior.
Possibly an exception for a student who is friends with a faculty brat, but you need to document each time that happens.
Wait, can you say that one again? I'm sorry.
If a child goes to the school and that child has friends, maybe exceptions for that, but each time it happens, there has to be paperwork that gets filled out. Students should not babysit for teachers. I babysat for a child predator. That was really creepy. I didn't know it at the time.
I did too, and I didn't know it at the time.
There was one predator not on the list who liked to have students out to his summer house in the West. That was really gross. Students shouldn't hang out with teachers outside of scheduled activities, neither at the school nor at school. If it occurs off campus, just fire the guy. School employees should not date the parents of a student, even if the student is a child of another employee. Because in the past, this has been a vector for abuse, a predator will date someone with a child and then go after that child. Similarly, affairs between employees who are married to other people. There's something about the school, but whenever these affairs occur, a child or children seem to be sexually abused around that. Male teachers should not teach students in the 8th, 9th, or 10th grade, because although a lot of boys were abused, that it was mostly girls, 13, 14, 15. That's when they start the abuse. So possibly add in the 7th grade. Just keep the male teachers away from them. Any doctor or psychologist on the board or working with the school must be let go immediately and permanently if they have their license or practice suspended or lose their license or voluntarily give up their license because they fear suspension, losing their license. This is because of the number of doctors I've come across in the TNC research who knew about what was going on and didn't do anything. And this is also should be true of psychologists and counselors. And probably the same rule for lawyers in the bar, though I haven't found that. Teachers should be banned from having social contact or friendship with students under the age, with alumni who are under the age of 30, to include social media. This is because teachers like to date, quotes, students whom they groomed during high school. Sometimes this is simply a continuation of the underage molestation that began in high school. Mm-hmm. Any such contact, such as accidental contact, needs to be reported to the school and filed and ended immediately. If the student needs letters of recommendation, they can go through the school. The school should not match survivor information retrieved from FOIA requests to the police. That's just awful. And the school should not hire from St. John's College. Just so many predators had some sort of affiliation with St. John's. It just seems to be, I don't know, like it's a
I've got
vector.
theories about that, but yeah, it's been a definite issue.
Finally, this is the last thing I want to. You say the last thing you wanted to say, and I'll say the last thing I want to say, and then we can end this. It's been a 2-hour podcast.
To add on to what you're saying, I would say that anytime that anyone at the school, student, parent, teacher, anybody tells anyone about something occurring, some grooming behavior, no matter how minor it is, it needs to be documented in writing, in permanent record at the school, and needs to be reported to outside authorities, not just handled internally with the school. And all of the lower level employees at the school need to be supported and empowered in reporting on their colleagues, their superiors, without judgment. And a tip for parents of students is to try to have people in your child's life who are not all wrapped up with the same institution. This is just generally speaking. Have people in your child's life who are involved and are not necessarily working for the school or used to work for the school or about to work for the school. Have people in your child's life outside of the community.
Because I mean, yeah, we're near Washington. We're near DC. There's theater. There's sport. This is not a culturally bereft area.
Sure.
Right.
Go outside. I back to the dead. I would love for survivors to get together to put together a memorial somewhere.
Yeah.
That would be someplace. I want someplace I can lay flowers. I think the number of people who died is into double digits. And one of the things that Tupelo and Cypress solved for me is I was having kind of a recurring nightmare. First off, being around abuse is hugely horrible for boys. It seems to present
any student, really, but yes.
It seems to present when you have a boy who is at all sensitive, and when someone in their sphere is being abused and they know about it, it almost presents like they're being abused. Boys are tenderer and I think many kinder than we give them credit for. And I've come across people who tried to stop the abuse in the 80s when they were students who are still hurt by what happened. I mean, lifelong hurt, decades still hurt. It haunts them, and it haunts them almost like they were raped themselves. That's something I've observed. I've never read anything, but I've just talked to too many men, and I get that look, and it's just, you're just like watching their soul fall. Back to the dead, I was getting this weird recurring nightmare of wandering around at night at a school shooting, and only I could see the bodies. And it happened I mean, the abuse and the deaths happened for decades, but they're real. And we recently had a mass shooting, and there were 5 people who died, but I think more people died here, and this is not to denigrate the horror of the journalists died doing their jobs, but, you know, I am still upset by so many people who seem content to descend with a charnel house in their midst. I mean, they're sending their kids to school on a mass grave. And I don't know what to do about that. And I don't think I can do anything about it. Like I will continue to do some things. And I would love to help work on a memorial and not at the school, in the town, because this is the town's problem. It's not just the school's problem. It's the town's problem.
Well, I think that you've taken certainly a step toward some of that healing with Tupelo and Cypress. And as you've admitted, some people dislike it.
And feel free to hate me. If you have anything you want to say to me, there's an email on the site. I mean, we will read it. Sometimes we don't check it every day. We check it about once a week, but we will read it. And I've gotten, but I have it there.
You're open to feedback.
Yeah.
Always open to feedback.
Right.
Yeah, if you want to tell me to go to hell, and if that will help you, please tell us to go to hell. I mean, tell us off.
Well, if you do want to check out, as we wrap up here, Tupelo and Cypress, it's tupeloandcypress.org.
Yeah, and also if you are someone who needs who meet the requirements and needs admissions to the closed site, you'll put a link to that too. Yeah, it's not the closed site, not the closed site, the closed
the group,
the closed group,
the group that I started. Yes,
the Facebook groups from the Key School.
Yeah.
Yes.
There are a few different Facebook groups of varying levels of secrecy and privacy and entry admissions. There's the one that my friend here mentioned earlier at Key School. We Stand Together is a public group. I believe anyone can join.
Yep.
And anyone in the public, anyone in the community can go there and get updates on developments from the school or relevant news. I started a group right after the report came out in January that is a closed group only for former students. And even if you didn't graduate from Key, we're still considering you an alum for the purposes of membership entry. So any alumni from the school, adult family members of alumni, and adult family members of current students are all welcome to join. This group is called Processing Key 2. The word processing, and then a space, then a hashtag, Key2, KEYTOO. And so if there's anyone out there who doesn't yet know about that group and wants something more private, to be able to get support from other alumni and also voice support for survivors, discuss these issues, talk about developments, ask questions about how this happened, get more information beyond what you can find in the public group, in the report, or on Tupelo and Cypress, please ask to join the group. We've got some entry questions to find out if you ever worked for the school. Since so many alumni went on to work for the school, we still allow folks who may have worked minimally, worked as minors, or were unpaid, are still allowed to join. So we are very open and welcoming to have you find our group. Just search for Processing hashtag Key2 on Facebook and you'll find us.
Okay, so it is a closed group, but it is searchable.
Yeah, there's also a closed wiki where some other people are putting together full faculty list, full board member list, going through newspaper articles, going through old documents. And hopefully if there are lawsuits, that will be of use to people. And if someone wants to try to legal stance, ask around the survivor community, and probably you'll probably eventually run into someone who'll be able to point you to someone who can give you access.
On that note, that reminds me of something else. If you are an alum from the school, reach out to the other alums that you know, even if you weren't really close in school. I recommend reaching out and just checking in with people, seeing how they're doing, not requiring any response. No one has to answer. No one has to talk about these things. But I'm worried about the people who have not known about the investigation, do not know about the listening session on June 22nd, who may not have heard about the therapy fund, and who may not be aware of all these Facebook groups. I want to make sure that they at least know those resources are available to them if they so choose to take advantage of them, which there are many reasons why someone might not, and that's valid.
Good advice there.
Well, thank you, John, for taking the time to listen to us.
I think the stories are important.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
No, the stories are important. I think you get a very cursory view in the report that was released. And I don't think anybody expected anything less, but I think that when you hear the stories of, you two that have lived varying degrees of what had happened at the school over the decades, sheds an entirely different light.
And if you don't, I have to invite people, don't believe Tupelo and Cypress. Get online, find 10 people from who graduated in a decade, ask them what happened. And I think what you'll find will surprise you, because these stories, most of them are not that hard to hear.
One thing I will say that, again, that led to a lot of my credence into Tupelo and Cypress is that I had the site before the report came out from Key School.
The site started going up in November of 2018, and it was done probably by Christmas. Between Christmas and New Year's, I think it got finished.
And as I looked through this, you could see the names and the stories, not identified by the numbers and the numeric numbering system that you had come up with. But then as the report came out a year later, it's like, okay, well...
Not a year later. It actually came out about 6 weeks later. Sorry.
Was it? Okay,
yeah,
okay.
6 weeks later, but... I got...
But the work for the website was happening for years.
Yeah, I probably communicated with well over 100 people. Sent out letters to many, many more sent out. And I got some help putting stuff together, too, from unexpected sources.
But the thing that stood out for me, though, was that the accuracy of Tupelo and Cypress, it was almost as if it was the report in the instances that they issued was there. I mean, I could look at the report and go, oh, that's number 1, 2, 3.
Oh.
Yep, all the perpetrators are there, and they're.
I didn't miss anybody who are in the report, but what haunts me is did I miss it? Did I miss a few? I think probably I did. I think there's some from the 2000s I missed.
And that goes back to what we said earlier, that nobody knows the scope of this abuse that has gone on for decades.
Sure.
The other thing is the school has a long history of being very good at shutting people up, and that needs to end. And calling folks, describing stuff as misinformation. Supposedly, at the end of the day, we all want people to be safer. But like I said, we do what we can.
Well, I'll tell you, powerful stories from both of you guys, and I thank you for your candor.
And thank you for
honesty.
going out and being an on your own vigilante researcher. That gave me. One of the things that helped convince me that all this had to be true, because it's hard when you're doing it all yourself and there's no one corroborating. Well,
I mean, that's the least of it. I mean, I think the bravery that you, as well as every one of the survivors,
I don't know if I'm that brave. I'm not putting my name on this.
has shown to do this, to come out, to speak, and certainly Carolyn Surik, who was featured in the Washington Post article, and
brave. The person who stood up at his funeral is.
Anomaly brave.
Yeah, anomaly level brave.
So I think
kind and good.
And there are going to be some more. I hate to use the word hero because it's overused, but
don't use it.
There's going to be more very brave stories, very powerful stories that I believe are going to come out through the years as they work through this. Certainly, if you've got a therapy fund established, I think there's
Would you be willing to do podcasts with survivors?
Sure.
Okay, that's a good thing. I hope that happens.
And again, my thing is that I want it to be real, and I want to make sure that you're comfortable with me, and so on and so forth. I mean,
you seem like a pretty comfortable guy. Having worked with Mr. Frenet, if anyone does wish to podcast, he's pretty user friendly from a source perspective. Have you found that to be true?
I have absolutely fond that to be true. Yeah.
So I don't feel awkward.
Well, let's not get into like a promotion thing here.
Not a promotion thing. I'm saying this feels like a safe space.
But and I thank you. I appreciate it. I mean, I try to do that. But tupeloandcypress.org. Check it out if you want to, or if not, there is a secure email on there.
Yep.
If you want
I think it's Tupelo and Cypress at protonmail.com. I think that's it.
You can yell at
give me help
at our guest, or you can praise her and
don't praise me.
Whatever you want to say.
Whatever you want to say, and for those that are listening that are graduates of Key School that are involved in this, you want to make sure you're looking out for the listening session, which is coming up in June. I don't know. Are the details exactly announced where it is going to be?
I think you can probably
not
find it
where.
Not where I haven't followed that. And please, if a bill comes out like HB 687 that bans statutes of that rescinds statutes of limitations, and offers and has a window where people can go back and sue even if statute of limitations have expired, support it. Yeah. Just write your legislature and support it.
Yeah, jump on your delegate and senator there to get that done. That's and it's ridiculous. I think the law is written with that age 38 is just totally written specifically to give the wiggle room for any kind of organization to get out of it.
Yeah, it doesn't keep the current law does not keep children safe.
That's true. To both of you, thanks you very much. I appreciate it. I have no words.
Thank you.
And
thank you, John. You've been an immense support. You really have.
Okay, and thank you for
being able to do this.
Friend who's elsewhere. Thank you very much for the work you've done. I'm amazed you've gotten the group, from what I've heard, working as well as it has.
Yeah, and there's been some really incredible conversations and discussions happening on there.
Oh, that's good.
Including even recently. So, and one other little thing about the group, just so people kind of get where it's coming from and what it's for. Tupelo and Cypress and the report and the legal system in general tend to be very perpetrator focused and not necessarily trauma sensitive, which is fine. They're not supposed to be. That's not their job. This group is intended to be more survivor focused and trauma sensitive, so that it is as much as we can make an online space with a whole bunch of alumni with different perspectives safe, we are endeavoring to do that and to keep it as safe as possible.
Fantastic. All right. Well, we will take a break here, and thank you very much for calling in.
All right. I'll take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This has been the Maryland Crabs Podcast with Tim Hamilton and John Fernay. Sure to follow them in all the regular places: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and online at themarylandcrabs.com. Take a moment to rate us on iTunes. Now, get the hell out of my kitchen. Seriously, go!
You're still here? It's over. Go home.